Thank you all for being here. Susan, I'm going to start with you because this is very much so a margin of error race. And I think it's going to stay that way until right on down till Election Day. But do you think so? And are we just beyond the days of having a landslide election in this country?
You know, after all is said and done, and by any account, an incredible news few months with the debates and Biden dropping out and the, 2 assassination attempts on the former president. If you look at the national polling averages right now, essentially, you can go back to the spring or summer of 2023, and it looked almost exactly the same. Donald Trump, in particular, has had a pretty immovable core of support, somewhere in the sort of 46% or so in these polling averages. And, most people in this country, after 9 years of Trump, have made up their minds about him. It's very hard to get it to move even 1 point. Where you've seen the movement this year, Simone, is among Democrats, many of whom were not sold on the idea of another term for Joe Biden. They have come home with a real considerable amount of enthusiasm for Kamala Harris. But it's hard to see that there's a lot more percentage there. At this point, she might lag a little bit behind where Biden was or where Hillary Clinton was at this point in their respective elections against Donald Trump. But there's not a lot more movement. It is definitely the safe bet to suggest that we're really just not going to know in a clear way the outcome of this election until the election night or even afterwards. Let's knock on wood and hope that's not the case one way or the other.
Could be another election week, as I think we all remember from 2020. Look, Gabriel, this particular new NBC News poll, and I do want to caution people, polls in general, I think that they are indicative, not predictive. But this particular poll, it shows a very big spike in popularity for Vice President Harris. I'm just wondering if we can officially say that the excitement around her is not just some honeymoon phase at this point. It seems very real, palpable, and lasting.
Sure, it's definitely very real. One of the difficult things is that there's still not much that we can compare this moment to because of the sort of unprecedented, compressed nature of the Harris campaign. She's still relatively new to this version of the national stage, and a lot of voters still say that they are learning a lot about her, or in many cases, still want to learn more about her. When you look at this new poll, what it does tell us is that there's still a lot of that interest, and she is benefiting from this new focus on her. That's, for example, why you see her talking about wanting another debate, because the first one went so well when she was able to introduce herself to a bigger slice of the American electorate. But we should caution, even when you look at these polls that do seem to show a slightly growing margin for her on the national scale, like Susan said, it's still a very divided country. But more to the point, she can win the national electoral vote by, or the national vote by, as much as she wants. But what really matters is the electoral college. And that's why you see her really focusing on a smaller and smaller slice of states like Pennsylvania, which many people think is going to be the tipping point state, and other ones like North Carolina and Georgia, which look like a little bit of a tougher ride for her, but ones that she really does need to be competitive in.
Yeah, I think the campaign recently announced that they are launching, the vice president herself is going to be visiting a number of these Midwest battleground states and more Sunbelt states. To me, it says the race is close. Okay, Akayla, look, we've talked about it. Harris's team, obviously, they very clearly want another debate.
Yes.
Donald Trump also very clearly seems like he wants nothing to do with another debate. That gives Democrats, the final, 6 weeks of this campaign to call him out for not wanting to debate. What do you think about the political calculation here? And do you think this changes depending on how the vice presidential debate goes? I have to imagine Donald Trump wouldn't want J.D. Vance to have the last word here.
Yeah, well, this vice presidential debate is really the last thing on the calendar until November that is going to have the type of media attention that debates draw. Of course, Harris is on the trail. She's going to rallies, but she's really only talking to a small portion of the electorate, usually very enthusiastic voters. And we saw from this poll, she has had a boost from that debate. A lot of people got to know her more. People had more favorable perceptions of her, but the race hasn't really had a big shakeup. And so they certainly think that another debate could be that thing that shakes up this race, that could move some points in some of those really crucial states and get voters to know her better. People still say they want to learn more about her character, more about her policies, and another debate would give her the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, we will see if Donald Trump changes his mind. Look, Susan, You pointed out on social media, a recent AP poll found that more voters say that Harris is tough, is more tough than Trump. And now we're seeing Democrats pushing Donald Trump to debate again by calling him, a chicken, if you will. Did that last debate show that the code has been cracked maybe on how to get under Donald Trump's skin? And I really do take Gabe's point about the fact that this is an unprecedented moment. And so the polls, we really have nothing to compare this to.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's stipulate that the chicken suit has been around a long time.
Well, yeah,
that's a golden oldie when it comes to candidates refusing to debate. I remember that from many years ago. But I do think that there's something, obviously, Donald Trump, the collective psychoanalysis that, we've all been engaged in these last 9 years trying to figure out, the unusual character of the former president is something that I've been fascinated to watch Harris, who clearly has a different theory of the case, it seems to me, than Joe Biden when it comes to the former president. You saw that, I think, used to great effect in the debate, where she really was very aggressively and frontally needling Trump, not just in the efforts to get him to take the bait, which he seemed to do every single time, but using some of his own buzzwords, his own trigger words, if you will. Donald Trump loves to talk about himself as strong and tough. He loves to demean his opponents as weak or, sick like a dog, and what is it with him and dogs? Let's talk about that. But I think it's very interesting, this issue of how she's seeking to undercut his very palpable kind of sexism when it comes to now the second woman that he's run against. There was this incredible interview the other day. I don't know if you noticed this clip with him where he said, she's a woman and she's doing better. And, the tone of incredulity in his voice. So I can imagine that when he saw a survey like that recent AP poll that you mentioned that showed her more voters were thinking that she was tough enough to be president than Trump. It was close, by the way, but it did have her narrowly ahead, that would be a big trigger for Donald Trump to see a result like that, given how he prides himself on being seen as his sort of image of a tough guy.
It has really struck me, Gabe, how in this election, it has been Donald Trump that has really wanted to wade in to what I think we would all refer to as like the culture wars. He wants to talk more about the effects of race and gender in this election than I think maybe some people are surprised that the Democrats are not doing that. The Harris campaign and the vice president herself is very much so talking about why she would like to why she thinks she's the best choice in this race based on a host of other factors, not that she's not that voters will make history by electing her. And I see the endorsements that she's getting. And I mean, most recently, there are hundreds of national security and military officials. I'm talking about former chairs of the main Republican Party, for example, who have endorsed this Harris-Walz ticket. Do you think the strategy that the Harris-Walz campaign is employing here, and especially with these endorsements and just how the vice president is taking on the issues in this race, will this make a difference with some of these independent and right-leaning voters? Maybe some of these folks who are undecided, like Bret Stephens from the New York Times, maybe he still needs to, see more.
Yeah, well, I don't want to speak about Bret specifically here, but when you do talk about marginal voters, that is what this whole game is about. And I think the Harris campaign has been smart to essentially telegraph, we don't need to worry about the Democratic core voters. We're not going to try and convince any Republican core voters. This is really going to be down to a few thousand voters, really, in just a few states. When you talk about Trump being the one who's taking the lead on a lot of these cultural issues, this is, in many cases, what you're seeing is Democrats learning from previous election cycles when people have not always responded well to Democrats trying to bait him into that. But by the way, voters have not responded well at all to when Trump weighs in on these culture war issues. Again and again, you've seen that his positions and what Democrats often talk about as extremism, which is, reflected in polling. People do find Trump's views very extreme. This has not worked for him in, election after election. This is when people find him to be the least effective as a communicator, but he swings at every pitch. Democrats know well that Trump wants to make news constantly, wants to talk about whatever seems to be inflaming the right wing specifically. So when you see Harris essentially just talking about the economy, That's responding to polls. That's because voters say, especially undecided voters say, they want to hear more from her on that, and they want to be reassured about the economy, which is the number one issue to so many of them. And when you see them specifically rolling out these endorsements from Republicans, yes, Democrats have been doing that since Hillary Clinton ran against Donald Trump, of course. But the reason they're doing that is because they're aiming at mostly suburban, moderate voters who say they'd be open to Harris, but they're not so sure. These are often people who voted for Republicans in the past, and they're people for whom a validator like a local state party chair or someone like Vice President Dick Cheney, wouldn't necessarily be someone that they'd follow wholeheartedly, but it gives them a little bit of a permission structure. That's the theory, at least. Will it work out? We'll have to see. It's worked in the past, but again, only on the margins.
Only on the margins. And I mean, look, Kayla, this is going to be a campaign and a race, frankly. I mean, we talk about it's going to be close. These independent voters, maybe some moderate Republican voters will matter for Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris, but also base voters for each. I mean, let's not forget Nikki Haley made a good run in that Republican primary. And then you've got these base Democratic voters that Democrats are going to need to turn out. What do the operations of each of the campaigns look like when it comes to infrastructure and money? Ground game.
Yeah, well, the Harris campaign is very proud of their ground game. They feel like they have more offices in swing states. They have offices in places like Nebraska where there's one electoral college vote. They have places in Florida, for example. So they're very proud of their infrastructure. They're also outraising Trump by a lot, particularly Harris. She outraised him last month 3-1. But at the same time, fundraising is not the end all be all. Hillary Clinton notably outraised Donald Trump. So they're still going to have to get their message out, actually knock on doors, actually connect with people, because money is not going to be enough. Offices are not going to be enough if they're not getting their message deployed.